A wealthy woman walked into the Sunshine Café, her designer heels clicking against the wooden floor. She spotted a tired-looking woman in faded clothes counting coins at a corner table, a small girl beside her coloring in a worn notebook. The wealthy woman's lips curled into a sneer as she watched the mother carefully calculate if she had enough for 2 hot chocolates. Nobody could have predicted what happened next when the mother, embarrassed by her empty wallet, tried to quietly leave. But a man in a black coat who had been watching everything unfold was about to change both women's lives forever. What occurred in the next few minutes left everyone in the cafe speechless, as one of Hollywood's most beloved actors stood up to defend a stranger's dignity. Julia Martinez pulled her worn jacket tighter as she hurried through the morning chill toward her first job at the local grocery store. At 32, her face carried the gentle lines of someone who smiled through hardship, though exhaustion lingered in her eyes. Her daughter Emma, a bright-eyed 7-year-old, was her reason for pushing forward each day, through double shifts and countless sacrifices. 10 years ago, Julia's life had looked completely different. She had been a nursing student, dreaming of a career helping others. Then came the whirlwind romance with David, Emma's father, who vanished when Julia told him about the pregnancy. Her parents, strict traditionalists, had turned their backs on their unmarried pregnant daughter, leaving her alone to figure out motherhood while barely out of her teens. The tiny apartment Julia and Emma called home sat above a noisy laundromat in the older part of town. The walls were thin, and the heating unreliable, but Julia had transformed it into a haven with second-hand furniture and Emma's colorful artwork. Every morning, she woke at 4:30 a.m. to start her shift stocking shelves at Fuller's Grocery, then rushed to her second job as a waitress at Danny's Diner by afternoon. Emma was a special child, wise beyond her years. She never complained about wearing hand-me-downs or having to spend afternoons at their elderly neighbor Mrs. Neal's apartment while Julia worked. Instead, she drew pictures of her mother as a superhero and left little notes in Julia's coat pockets. "You're the best mom ever," written in wobbly child's handwriting. This particular Wednesday marked a rare milestone. Julia had finally saved enough tips to take Emma to the Sunshine Café, an establishment slightly more upscale than their usual haunts. It was Emma's birthday wish. She had seen the cafe's famous hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and chocolate shavings through the window on their bus rides to school. For 3 months, Julia had put aside every extra dollar, skipping her own lunch some days to make it happen. The cafe sat in the newer part of town, where polished storefronts lined clean streets and luxury cars filled parking spaces. Julia usually felt invisible in this neighborhood, just another service worker rushing between jobs. But today was different. Today she was taking her daughter somewhere special, somewhere they could pretend they belonged among the regular clientele with their designer bags and manicured nails. That morning, Julia had spent extra time braiding Emma's hair and pressing their best clothes. Emma's dress from the church donation box and Julia's one nice blouse, purchased from a thrift store for job interviews. They had practiced proper table manners the night before, Emma giggling as she demonstrated how to hold a fancy teacup with her pinky raised. The money for their cafe visit was carefully counted and recounted, wrapped in a small envelope in Julia's purse. She had memorized the menu prices from the window, calculating exactly what they could afford. The hot chocolate would be their splurge, but Julia would skip getting one for herself. Watching Emma enjoy this special treat would be enough. What Julia couldn't have known was that this ordinary Wednesday, this simple attempt to give her daughter a birthday memory, would become something entirely unexpected. She couldn't have predicted how her careful plans would collide with the cruel judgments of others, or how a chance encounter would transform their quiet celebration into a moment that would change not just their lives, but the perspectives of everyone present in the cafe that morning. As they approached the cafe's gleaming entrance, Julia squeezed Emma's small hand, drawing strength from her daughter's excited bounce. Through the window, she could see the usual morning crowd, business people in suits, ladies in expensive workout gear fresh from yoga class, all casually spending more on breakfast than Julia earned in several hours of work. For a moment, she hesitated, her hand on the door handle. But Emma's hopeful face pushed away her doubts. They deserved this small joy, this one morning of pretending they belonged in this world of casual luxury. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, marking the beginning of what would become an unforgettable morning. Neither Julia nor Emma noticed the man in the black coat seated in the corner, his coffee untouched as he observed the cafe's morning scene with quiet attention. They couldn't have known that his presence would soon become the pivot point around which their entire day would turn. The Sunshine Café smelled of freshly ground coffee and expensive pastries. Julia guided Emma to a small table near the window, carefully pulling out the chair for her daughter who beamed at the grown-up treatment. The morning sunlight caught the silver sugar bowls and polished coffee cups, making everything sparkle in a way that seemed magical to Emma's young eyes. A woman in her 40s sat at the next table, her Hermes bag placed prominently on the spare chair. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and tailored designer suit spoke of wealth that Julia could only imagine. The woman glanced at Julia and Emma, her eyes narrowing as she took in their carefully pressed but clearly worn clothes. Julia opened the menu with trembling fingers, though she had memorized the prices weeks ago. Emma bounced slightly in her seat, pointing at the pictures of elaborate hot chocolates topped with mountains of whipped cream. The envelope with their carefully saved money felt heavy in Julia's pocket as she did the math one more time in her head. The cafe's waitress approached their table, her professional smile faltering slightly as she glanced between Julia and the expensive clientele surrounding them. Julia ordered in a quiet voice, 1 hot chocolate with whipped cream for Emma, and just a glass of water for herself. The woman at the next table snorted softly, not bothering to hide her disdain. Emma's excitement dimmed as she noticed her mother wasn't ordering anything. "Mommy, aren't you having hot chocolate too?" Her small voice carried in the quiet cafe. Julia forced a smile, explaining that she wasn't thirsty, but the wealthy woman had already begun speaking loudly to her companion who had just arrived. "It's ridiculous, really. People coming here when they clearly can't afford it. In my day, people knew their place." Her voice was pitched to carry, each word calculated to sting. "I suppose they're trying to pretend they belong here, but some people simply don't." Julia's cheeks burned as she fumbled with the menu, trying to shield Emma from the cruel words. But the wealthy woman wasn't finished. She stood up, deliberately moving her chair to create space between their tables. "And bringing children who haven't been taught proper restaurant behavior. This isn't some fast food establishment." Other customers began to take notice, some lowering their newspapers or pausing their conversations to watch. Emma's lower lip trembled as she understood something was wrong, though she was too young to fully grasp the situation. Julia reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand, fighting back tears of humiliation. The waitress returned with Emma's hot chocolate, placing it carefully on the table. The wealthy woman chose this moment to speak again, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Oh, just 1 drink. I suppose that's all you could manage. Though really, if you have to count pennies, perhaps the dollar store would be more appropriate for your situation." Julia's hands shook as she reached for her purse, thinking only of getting Emma away from this horrible situation. But as she opened the envelope, several coins slipped out, scattering across the floor with tiny metallic sounds that seemed to echo in the now silent cafe. Emma immediately slid from her chair to help gather them, her small fingers chasing after the rolling pennies. The wealthy woman laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Well, that certainly proves my point. Collecting coins from the floor. How absolutely common." She turned to address the cafe at large, as if inviting everyone to join in her amusement. "This is what happens when people don't understand their proper place in society." Julia felt frozen, her chest tight with humiliation and anger. Emma had stopped picking up coins and was now pressing against her mother's side, trying to make herself as small as possible. The hot chocolate sat untouched, its whipped cream slowly melting into the dark liquid below, the simple birthday treat now tainted by cruelty. The cafe had grown uncomfortably quiet. Other patrons shifted in their seats, some looking away in embarrassment, others watching with a mix of discomfort and morbid fascination. A young couple at a nearby table whispered to each other, casting sympathetic glances at Emma, but no one spoke up. The wealthy woman, encouraged by the silence, continued her commentary. "I suppose this is what happens when people have children they can't properly provide for. In my opinion, it's practically child abuse, giving them ideas above their station." She adjusted her expensive jacket, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Better to learn early that some places simply aren't meant for everyone." Julia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She had endured much in her life, long hours, tired feet, empty cupboards, but seeing her daughter's birthday treat ruined by such deliberate cruelty was too much. Yet before she could gather their things to leave, movement from the corner of the cafe caught everyone's attention. The man in the black coat, who had been silently observing everything, was rising from his seat. The tension in the cafe seemed to crystallize as the wealthy woman turned toward the approaching figure, her expression shifting from smug superiority to uncertainty. She recognized him immediately, everyone did, but refused to let her composure crack. Instead, she lifted her chin higher, as if preparing to defend her position. The wealthy woman's companion tugged at her sleeve, whispering urgently, but she shrugged off the warning. "I don't care who he is," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Someone needs to maintain standards in this establishment." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying her nervousness as Keanu Reeves stood beside their table. Julia remained frozen, one hand protectively on Emma's shoulder, as the actor surveyed the scene. His presence seemed to fill the space without any need for dramatic gestures or raised voices. He wore simple black clothes, his beard slightly unkempt, but carried himself with a quiet dignity that made the wealthy woman's designer outfit seem somehow gaudy in comparison. "I've been sitting over there," he said, his voice gentle but carrying clearly through the silent cafe, "watching you deliberately hurt this woman and her daughter." He paused, his eyes moving from the untouched hot chocolate to Emma's frightened face, then to Julia's rigid posture. "And I've been trying to understand why." The wealthy woman's face flushed red, but she attempted to maintain her superior attitude. "This is hardly any of your business. I was simply expressing concern about appropriate venues for certain elements of society." Her words hung in the air, their ugliness more apparent now that they were directed at someone she couldn't easily dismiss. Keanu pulled out a chair and sat down, positioning himself between Julia's table and the wealthy woman. The action was smooth, unhurried, but somehow made it impossible for the woman to continue her verbal assault without directly addressing him. "Let's talk about appropriate behavior," he said, his voice remaining calm but taking on an edge of steel. The wealthy woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her perfectly manicured hands fidgeting with her designer handbag. "I don't see why you're involving yourself in this situation," she said, her voice less certain now. "Surely you understand the importance of maintaining certain standards." "Standards?" Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Let's discuss standards. I see a mother who saved her money to give her daughter a special birthday treat. I see a child who was excited about a simple cup of hot chocolate until you decided to destroy that joy. Those are the only standards that matter here." Emma, still pressed against her mother's side, looked up at Keanu with wide eyes. He smiled at her gently before turning back to the wealthy woman. "The only person in this cafe who has demonstrated inappropriate behavior is you." The wealthy woman's face alternated between red and white as she glanced around the cafe, seeking support but finding none. Other customers were now openly watching, many nodding in agreement with Keanu's words. The waitress who had served Julia stood near the counter, a small smile playing at her lips. "Well, I never," the woman began, but Keanu cut her off with a raised hand. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "You never thought about how your words might affect this child. You never considered that your actions might harm someone who was simply trying to create a happy memory. You never stopped to think that true class has nothing to do with designer labels or bank accounts." The woman's companion had shrunk in her seat, clearly mortified by the situation. The wealthy woman herself seemed to deflate slightly, her carefully constructed superiority crumbling in the face of such direct confrontation. But pride made her attempt one last defense. "I was merely suggesting that there are more suitable places for people of their." She gestured vaguely at Julia and Emma, but her words trailed off as Keanu stood up. "More suitable places?" His voice remained quiet, but carried an authority that silenced the entire cafe. "The only unsuitable person in this establishment is someone who believes they have the right to humiliate a child on her birthday. Someone who measures human worth by the price of their clothes or the contents of their wallet." The wealthy woman's face crumpled slightly, the first sign that his words had penetrated her armor of self-righteousness. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, suddenly aware of how the entire cafe was watching her, how her actions appeared through their eyes. Julia, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally found her voice. "We should go," she whispered, reaching for her purse. But Keanu turned to her with a gentle smile. "Please stay," he said softly. "Your daughter's hot chocolate is getting cold, and I believe she deserves to enjoy her birthday treat." He turned back to the wealthy woman, his expression hardening slightly. "In fact, I think some people here owe this young lady an apology." The cafe held its breath, waiting to see how the situation would resolve. The wealthy woman sat rigid in her chair, caught between her pride and the undeniable truth of his words, as the morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating a scene that would change everyone present in ways they never expected. The tension dissolved into stunned silence as Keanu pulled out his wallet and placed several $100 bills on the wealthy woman's table. "This should cover everyone's breakfast," he said quietly. "Sometimes people need a reminder that generosity costs far less than cruelty." The wealthy woman stared at the money, her perfectly lined lips trembling slightly. Her companion touched her arm, whispering something that made her shoulders slump. The carefully constructed facade of superiority cracked, revealing a flicker of shame beneath. Keanu turned to Julia and Emma, his voice softening. "May I join you?" he asked, directing the question mainly to Emma, who nodded shyly. He sat down, signaling the waitress. "Could we get another hot chocolate? This one's probably cold by now." He looked at Julia. "And one for Mom too, I think. Every birthday celebration needs proper company." The waitress hurried over, her earlier hesitation replaced with warm efficiency. As she cleared away the cold drink, Emma watched Keanu with a mixture of curiosity and lingering uncertainty. He noticed the worn notebook filled with colorful drawings on their table. "Are you an artist?" he asked her gently. Emma's face brightened slightly. "I like to draw," she whispered, sliding the notebook toward him. "Mommy puts my pictures on our fridge." Julia watched, tears threatening to spill, as her daughter slowly emerged from her shell of fear. The wealthy woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat, watching this interaction. The contrast between her earlier behavior and Keanu's simple kindness seemed to affect her more than any direct confrontation could have. Her companion stood up, gathering her things. "Patricia," she said firmly, "I think we should leave." But Keanu turned to them. "Actually, I think you should stay." His voice remained gentle but carried an unmistakable authority. "Sometimes we need to sit with our mistakes to learn from them." Patricia, the wealthy woman, sank back into her chair, her usual confidence completely erased. The fresh hot chocolates arrived, topped with extra whipped cream and chocolate shavings. Emma's eyes widened at the sight, but she hesitated, looking at her mother for permission. Julia nodded, managing a small smile. Keanu watched as Emma took her first sip, leaving a tiny whipped cream mustache that finally made her giggle. "You know," Keanu said, addressing both tables but speaking mainly to Emma, "I believe that how we treat others shows who we really are. Not our clothes, not our money, but our actions." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is stay kind in the face of unkindness." Patricia dabbed at her eyes with an expensive napkin, her designer mascara slightly smudged. She began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words that didn't come easily to her. "I behaved terribly." The admission hung in the air, heavy with belated recognition. Keanu nodded, acknowledging her words without immediately absolving her. "The question is," he said quietly, "what will you do differently tomorrow?" The question seemed to reach beyond Patricia, touching everyone in the cafe who had remained silent during her cruel display. Julia straightened in her chair, finding strength in the simple dignity of the moment. "Emma," she said softly, "why don't you show your drawings?" Her daughter hesitated, then carefully opened her notebook, revealing pages filled with colorful scenes of their life together. Their small apartment transformed by a child's imagination into a palace, the laundromat below their home depicted as a magical place full of swirling colors. Patricia leaned forward despite herself, seeing for the first time the rich inner world of the child she had so carelessly dismissed. Each page revealed love, creativity, and joy that had nothing to do with material wealth. Her hand trembled as she reached for her untouched coffee. "The world becomes smaller when we judge others," Keanu observed, helping Emma turn another page of her drawings. "But it expands infinitely when we choose to see the beauty in every story." He smiled at a particularly bright drawing of Julia in a superhero cape. "Your mom is a superhero?" Emma nodded, her earlier fear forgotten. "She works 2 jobs and still reads me stories every night," she said proudly. "And she saved for 3 whole months to bring me here for my birthday." The simple truth in her words made Patricia flinch visibly. The cafe had grown quiet again, but this time the silence held something different. Reflection, perhaps, or the first stirrings of change. Other customers who had watched the scene unfold were now looking at their own expensive drinks and designer accessories with thoughtful expressions. Keanu signed Emma's notebook, adding a small sketch beside his signature. "Never stop drawing," he told her. "Art helps us see the world through other people's eyes." He glanced meaningfully at Patricia. "And that's something we all need to practice more often." The morning sun had risen higher, casting long shadows across the cafe's polished floors. In its light, the distinctions between expensive suits and worn clothes seemed to matter less, while the warmth of simple kindness glowed more brightly than any diamond bracelet. The cafe manager appeared at their table, his earlier absence now compensated by earnest attention. He addressed Julia and Emma first, his voice carrying genuine remorse. "Your breakfast is completely complimentary today," he said, then turned to Keanu with respectful acknowledgement. "And thank you, sir, for reminding us what true hospitality means." Patricia stood slowly, smoothing her designer suit with trembling hands. She looked at Julia and Emma, really seeing them for the first time. "I need to apologize," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My behavior was inexcusable. I forgot that every person has dignity, every child deserves joy." She reached for her purse, but Keanu shook his head slightly. "The best apology is changed behavior," he said quietly. "Maybe next time you see someone counting coins or hesitating at the door, you'll remember this moment and choose kindness instead." His words carried no judgment, only a gentle invitation to be better. The other customers in the cafe had begun to move, as if awakening from a spell. A young woman in expensive yoga wear approached their table, speaking softly to Julia. "I should have spoken up earlier. Your daughter's drawings are beautiful, and you're clearly an amazing mother." Others followed, each offering small gestures of support and acknowledgement. Emma, now more relaxed, continued showing her drawings to Keanu, who gave each page his full attention. Julia watched her daughter bloom under his kind interest, the morning's earlier humiliation gradually fading. The waitress brought more hot chocolate, this time with extra marshmallows, her service now warm and attentive. Patricia remained standing, seemingly uncertain what to do with herself. Her companion had already left, unwilling to remain part of the scene. Finally, Patricia spoke again, her voice different now, stripped of its former arrogance. "I have a daughter too," she said softly. "She's in college now, but I remember when she was Emma's age. I wouldn't have wanted anyone to treat her the way I treated your child." Julia met Patricia's eyes, seeing the genuine regret there. "Children teach us what really matters," she replied quietly. "Emma reminds me every day that joy doesn't come from what we have, but from who we are to each other." The cafe manager returned, this time with an announcement. "We're implementing a new policy," he declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This cafe welcomes everyone. We'll have a weekly program where families can enjoy our beverages and pastries at reduced prices." He looked at Julia and Emma. "And we'd be honored if you'd be our first regular participants." Keanu smiled, but kept his attention on Emma's drawings, allowing the moment to belong to those most affected by it. The morning light had shifted, painting the cafe in warm golden tones that seemed to soften all the hard edges of class and privilege that had earlier divided the space. Other customers began sharing their own stories, of struggling single parents who had raised them, of times when kindness from strangers had made all the difference. The cafe's atmosphere transformed, becoming a place of connection rather than division. Patricia listened to these stories with growing awareness, her designer bags and jewelry seeming to weigh differently on her now. As the morning wound down, Emma had finished her second hot chocolate and was completing a new drawing, a scene of the cafe, but this time filled with people of all kinds, sharing tables and smiles. She carefully tore it out and offered it to Keanu, who accepted it with genuine appreciation. "This is exactly how a cafe should look," he said, studying the drawing. "Everyone welcome, everyone belonging." He turned to Julia. "You've raised an artist who sees the world as it should be." The manager approached one final time, handing Julia a gift card. "Please come back," he said sincerely. "Your presence enriches our community." Patricia, watching this, quietly gathered her things and walked to the door, pausing only briefly to look back at the scene she had helped create, not through her cruelty, but through the transformative power of its correction. The morning had become something none of them could have predicted, a lesson in humanity, delivered through hot chocolate and children's drawings, guided by the quiet wisdom of an unexpected advocate. As Emma packed up her notebook, her face glowing with restored joy, Julia realized that sometimes the worst moments can become catalysts for the best changes. The story of what happened at Sunshine Café spread through the community in ripples. A customer's video of Keanu's intervention found its way to social media, not because of his celebrity status, but because of the profound impact his simple act of kindness had created. The cafe, once known for its expensive drinks and exclusive atmosphere, transformed into something more meaningful. The manager kept his promise. Every Tuesday became community morning at Sunshine Café, where families could enjoy quality treats at reduced prices. Julia and Emma were always welcomed with warm smiles, their regular table by the window becoming a symbol of change. The staff, who had received comprehensive training in inclusive service, learned basic sign language and kept communication cards handy for customers with different needs. Patricia's transformation proved the most surprising. A week after the incident, she returned to the cafe, this time dressed more simply. She sought out the manager, offering to fund a program that would provide free birthday celebrations for children from low-income families. Her own daughter, hearing about what had happened, had called her in tears, sharing stories of times she too had felt judged by wealth and status. Julia found her footing in unexpected ways. Other cafe customers, learning of her background in nursing studies, connected her with resources and opportunities. A regular patron who owned a medical staffing agency offered her a flexible position that allowed her to return to school part-time. The community that had witnessed her humiliation now rallied to support her dreams. Emma's artwork gained a special place in the cafe. The manager created a small gallery wall where local children could display their drawings, with Emma's inclusive cafe scene as the centerpiece. Her creative spirit, temporarily dampened by cruelty, blazed brighter than ever. She started teaching other children how to draw during community mornings, her natural kindness touching everyone she met. The waiters and staff underwent their own evolution. Tyler, who had served them that fateful morning, became particularly committed to making everyone feel welcome. He kept small toys in his apron pockets for children and learned to read discomfort in customers' faces, stepping in with gentle assistance before anyone felt out of place. Local business owners took notice of the cafe's transformation. Other establishments began implementing similar inclusive policies, creating a ripple effect of positive change throughout the community. The invisible barriers between different social classes began to blur, replaced by a growing understanding that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. 1 month after the incident, a small brass plaque appeared near the cafe's entrance. It didn't mention names or specific events, but simply read, "Kindness served daily. Everyone welcome." Below it, someone had added Emma's quote in elegant script, "Joy doesn't come from what we have, but from who we are to each other." The wealthy customers who had previously dominated the cafe's atmosphere found themselves changed as well. Designer bags and expensive watches became less prominent as people focused more on genuine connections. Conversations between patrons from different walks of life became common, bridging gaps that had once seemed unbridgeable. Julia started a small support group for single parents that met at the cafe during community mornings. They shared resources, watched each other's children, and created a network of mutual support that extended far beyond their morning coffee meetings. The cafe became a place where people found not just physical nourishment, but emotional sustenance as well. The incident had revealed something profound about human nature: how quickly judgment can dissolve in the face of genuine kindness, how easily walls can fall when someone has the courage to speak up. Keanu's intervention had lasted only minutes, but its impact continued to grow, teaching everyone involved that true class has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with how we treat one another. Emma's birthday, which had started with humiliation, became a catalyst for change that touched countless lives. The cafe's transformation proved that sometimes it takes one person standing up for what's right to remind an entire community of their better nature. The simple act of defending a child's dignity had created ripples of kindness that continued to spread, changing hearts and minds one cup of hot chocolate at a time. Several weeks later, Julia and Emma returned to Sunshine Café on a quiet Sunday morning. The bell chimed softly as they entered, but this time there was no hesitation in their steps. The aroma of coffee and freshly baked pastries welcomed them, along with genuine smiles from the staff. Emma carried her blue notebook, now filled with even more drawings, including several of the cafe's transformed atmosphere. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the new brass plaque that had become a talking point in the community. Their usual table waited for them, a small vase with a single daisy adding a touch of warmth. Tyler, who had undergone the most remarkable transformation among the staff, approached with 2 menus he didn't really need to bring. He already knew their usual order. As they settled in, Julia noticed a familiar figure sitting in the corner, his black coat draped over the chair. Keanu looked up from his coffee, offering a quiet nod of recognition. Emma, spotting him too, pulled out her latest drawing, a portrait of him sitting at their table that morning, defending their dignity. She walked over shyly and placed it on his table. He studied the drawing with genuine interest, noting how she had captured not just the scene, but the feeling of that morning. The cafe's walls now displayed dozens of children's artworks, but Emma's original drawing of an inclusive cafe remained central, its message clearer than ever. Other customers came and went, the usual morning rush creating a pleasant buzz of conversation. Patricia's community program had taken off, and a young family was celebrating their daughter's birthday in the corner, complete with hot chocolate and extra whipped cream. The mother caught Julia's eye and smiled, a gesture of understanding passing between them. As Keanu prepared to leave, he stopped briefly at their table. Emma showed him her notebook, now containing not just her own art but drawings from other children who joined her impromptu art sessions during community mornings. "You've created something beautiful here," he said softly, his words encompassing much more than just the drawings. Julia watched her daughter chatting animatedly about her art, remembering the scared little girl who had nearly been crushed by cruelty just weeks ago. The cafe had become more than just a place for coffee and pastries. It had transformed into a sanctuary where dignity and kindness were served in equal measure with the beverages. As Keanu headed toward the door, he paused by the brass plaque, reading Emma's words once again. The morning sun caught his profile as he smiled, seeming to approve of how a moment of intervention had grown into lasting change. Without fanfare, he slipped out into the street, leaving behind a legacy far greater than fame. The reminder that one person standing up for what's right can transform an entire community. Julia and Emma continued their breakfast, their hot chocolates topped with extra whipped cream, their hearts full with the knowledge that they belonged here, just as much as anyone else. The cafe hummed with the sound of diverse voices sharing stories, dreams, and simple moments of human connection, proving that sometimes the greatest changes start with a single act of kindness.